go through, just to holler, and I'll stop and we can answer any questions as we go through that you might have. Okay. So for the introduction, just to really cover off what we're going to do today, I'll give a quick WAMITAB update and sort of education skills update, very brief, let you know where we're at. Then we'll go into some new qualifications, and then we'll focus, really primarily focus for today, is about the new model for delivery of the Level 1 award in waste and recycling. So we'll look at the requirements for delivery, the learning materials that we've produced for you, the new assessment model, and the benefits of delivering in this new model. So for the WAMITAB update, I just want to speak a little bit about the skills system and the pressure that we're feeling from budget cuts, particularly in the adult skills budget. I know those of you who access funding are probably feeling it as well. We see our centres who are fund holders looking at a reduction of up to a quarter of their funding reduced for this funding year. Really that has an impact on how they look at delivering things and the ways that they have to look at cutting costs and making the money stretch further. I think we all probably agree that we don't want to have to say no to learners who want to come on to qualifications and want to access those qualifications so that they can perhaps progress in education or move into work. No one wants to do that, and so what we're really having to do is look at ways to reduce the cost of delivery of qualifications so that budget stretches a bit further, but the learner numbers don't have to go down. And so what we've been doing is looking at ways that we can support and ways that we can provide assistance in reducing those costs associated with delivery. And that might be costs for personnel, costs for development time, costs for assessment time, and we're looking at that and seeing how we can help. And we're also seeing we've actually had from the 18th, I think the 18th of August, we were informed by the Skills Funding Agency as an awarding organisation, and all awarding organisations would no longer be able to apply for funding after today, 3rd of September. So for the 15-16 funding year, there's a moratorium on applications for funding for new qualifications going on to that catalogue. And so we've had until today. Helen and I have been busy sort of borrowing away trying to get qualifications regulated and get them ready to apply for funding on that catalogue, because after today we won't be able to even appeal any decisions on funding. There's a complete moratorium on additions to the skills funding, the approved qualifications catalogue. And so we're seeing the difficulties our end as well. As a result of that, we've been developing new qualifications that perhaps might not have come into being until slightly later in the year. The development has been brought up somewhat. We've got a new introduction to reuse and refurbishment. It's a level 1 qualification. It's a single unit qualification, and it's really covering sustainability, how reuse fits into the waste hierarchy, what reuse means, and how to make decisions about whether something is reusable or whether it can only be recycled. And really the focus on that is for people working perhaps in charity shops who are taking in goods from the public and making decisions about whether those goods could be reused and have a value beyond that of just a recycling one. So there's that new qualification. There's a new certificate in computer refurbishment. That's at level 2, and it's a slightly more involved sort of reuse and refurbishment qualification, and it's focused on computers. We were approached by a charity in the sector who are delivering a course around computer refurbishment and wanted to have that recognised as a proper qualification, a full regulated qualification. So we've worked with them to develop that, and although they deliver it, we now offer it to all of our centres. And so those of you who want to deliver computer refurbishment at level 2, that's a competence-based qualification, like sort of portfolio of evidence assessment. You know, that will be on our books very shortly. It's regulated now. It's just a case of getting the admin things up and running our side and getting it ready for you to submit scheme approval. So that's 2 new qualifications. And then we've done an Introduction to Cleaning Principles, which is a knowledge-based Level 1 qualification that prepares people for perhaps an apprenticeship programme, prepares them for entry into the cleaning industry, and it's really about understanding what we mean by professional cleaning, what the industry covers, why it's so important, and how to use and select different cleaning agents and different methods so that you can safely go out and work in the cleaning industry. So there's 3 new qualifications, lower level qualifications, and those 3 qualifications are all regulated. We've had the agreement from our regulators, Ofqual and Welsh Assembly Government, to have those regulated. It's at the moment we're just waiting to see if they'll be funded. We're hopeful that they will be. Helen's nodding vigorously. We've submitted those this week to the Skills Funding Agency, and we await to hear from the next update and the publishing of the catalogue. In terms of new opportunities, essentially we're trying to provide new products and services to ensure that as funding for adult skills goes down, we still are able to give learners access to training and learning and development, perhaps in smaller bite-sized pieces, perhaps in a different format, while still maintaining our core qualification set. So it really is a process of evolution rather than revolution. We're moving outwards as well. You will have seen the move into parking as part of integrated facilities management, the move into driving goods as part of waste management, cleaning and facilities management. So we are growing within our own footprint, not outside of what we recognise as being part of the sectors that we represent. So we have an increased portfolio for centres to deliver. We've got those 3 new qualifications coming on board, and I'm sure many of you will know that we've been reviewing our Level 4 qualifications. So our Level 4 Operator Competence Scheme is undergoing a review and will be republished sometime very early next year. So we're increasing that portfolio and updating it and reviewing it as we can. We've also seen an enhanced profile, so we now regularly have articles in Skip Hire magazine. That's a monthly article from WAMITAB in there. We're working on partnerships with MRW as well. We're sponsoring awards for the CIWM RWM awards, and we have a more proactive online presence with social media. We have Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook pages, now seeing over 2,000 followers on Twitter. And actually, if you haven't, it's worth just liking our Facebook page and following us on Twitter, because we republish interesting waste, parking, facilities management, cleaning articles regularly every day. And it's just free resources that you can, if you enjoy it, you can print it off and use it with learners. It's just worth following for those, if nothing else. In terms of working with employers, we couldn't actually do any of what we do in terms of developing qualifications and expanding our portfolio without the support of employers. Our qualifications are only valid if they're recognised by people in the industry, and we use employers regularly. We have standards and technical advisory groups who meet to discuss new needs and the content of qualifications. So the increased portfolio centres deliver is not just regulated qualifications. We also offer a credit, which is a system where we recognise perhaps a centre or an employer's own learning materials or particular courses. The Validate programme is very much a work-based assessment programme that can be used almost like a skills audit tool. We have e-learning available and is linked from our website. We're offering revision guides now for the continuing competence scheme, which can be used if you're supporting people to prepare for continuing competence as centres. We're now developing and delivering parking qualifications. We work with the British Parking qualification to that, and actually deliver those, certainly the level 2, through a multiple choice question paper. So we've got some experience of MCQ testing there. We're also looking at becoming an independent assessment organisation. So certainly coming in, we're looking at being able to offer that extra service to those people using new trailblazers. Obviously there isn't one for waste at the moment, but we will be looking for employer partners to develop waste trailblazers as it becomes apparent that they're needed. What we don't want to lose is the momentum that apprenticeships in the waste and resource management industry have gathered. I mean, they were new to us 5 years ago, and we've had hundreds of people come through them successfully, and we don't want to lose that momentum. So more innovation to follow. Okay, so in terms of the qualification changing, the level 1 award in waste and recycling, the context for that change really is that there was an information point received from Ofqual telling us that there would be the withdrawal of QCF rules, and that some rules had already been withdrawn. So we're moving into a new framework out of the qualifications credit framework, shortly going into the framework of regulated qualifications. I think essentially Ofqual recognised that whilst the QCF had some really fantastic points around sharing credit and bite-sized learning, there were also some rules that were holding back innovation and actually putting a burden on learners where assessment was concerned. And one of those rules was about mastery and compensatory routes to assessment. So with competence qualifications, it makes absolute sense we should use the mastery route to achievement, because I always say you don't want the airline pilot who can take off but can't land. We want them to be able to do absolutely everything. We need to know that they can do everything before we put them in a position where they're expected to do it, and perhaps it would be unsafe if they couldn't. So in terms of ability to be able to do a job, we need to retain that mastery element and use portfolio of evidence to achieve all assessment criteria within the units of a qualification. With compensatory, it is slightly different, because with knowledge qualifications, it has been recognised practice for many years that compensation is okay. You're not expected to achieve 100% of a degree. You're not expected to achieve 100% of GCSEs or A-levels, and that same rule should apply to vocational qualifications. And so where a qualification or a unit is relating solely to knowledge, and it's talking about being able to know or understand something and being able to describe or explain or identify something, then we should be able to use a form of assessment that recognises that no one can recall everything in a closed book testing environment, and that a percentage mark, as long as that percentage is monitored over time, is appropriate. And that has been a big change from how we were when we first moved into the QCF, when with knowledge qualifications we were having to put 100% achievement rates in. And so that means we can be a bit more innovative about how we provide assessments for knowledge-based qualifications, and look at how we set assessment strategies for them. So aside from those Ofqual regulatory changes, the other context is, of course, funding allocations. We know that funding allocations drop significantly. What does this mean for delivery? It means that delivery has to be cheaper. So people will be looking to reduce the level of subcontracts that they use. They might be looking to reduce the cost of personnel, so using only one individual rather than two, those types of things. It's about trying to make the qualifications available to the same number of learners as before, not losing any quality, but still being able to deliver. So we've developed a new model because we want to make the qualification more accessible to providers. I think the fact that we have developed all of the learning materials and support materials for the qualification will mean that much more, well, we have a wider breadth of people offering it. Currently, the qualification's been doing brilliantly well, but only going through a couple of very few number of centres, and that might be because it is heavy knowledge based and it takes a lot of time to develop those materials. So the hope is that with us doing that, it will have more uptake. Customer demand. So we receive feedback from all of our qualifications. When we send out certificates for our qualifications, they always go with a feedback form for the learner, and we receive those feedback forms back. And learners were talking to us about making some interesting materials to look at and those types of things, which we've responded to. It's also, you know, as I've said, we've been delivering the parking qualifications at level 2 with a multiple choice testing route for some time now, and the feedback of that has been fantastic. The successes of that have been really very good, respected by the British Parking Association, respected by the centres that we work with in parking, and by the employers and learners who are achieving those qualifications. And so we are confident in that, confident enough to roll it out to the level 1 award in West It's not a thing. Talking about developing learning materials for a long time. I've certainly been talking about it for 5 years. Mark's been talking about it for 3. It's something that we've wanted to do. It's something we want to provide learners with and support centres with. And this seemed like a good opportunity to sort of trial that and test that out on quite a small qualification. So the qualification itself, it's a regulated qualification with Ofqual and Qualifications Wales. It's open entry, so there's no formal entry requirements, and it's a level 1. So the purpose of the qualification is to provide entry to industry and employability. It's 7 credits, and we estimate 46 guided learning hours. That's an average based on average learners, which we all know don't really exist. So it's a difficult one. And essentially it will change depending on the needs of every individual learner. We've provided presentation slides that could be delivered in 2 days or could be delivered in 5 days. And those are, it will really depend on the ability of your learners to take in that information. It's a knowledge-based qualification, it always has been. There is potential for on-site practice. We suggest that if there's a site available, so if you're doing it as an induction program with an employer, absolutely build in work on site into it. We've allowed time for that in the lesson plans. If that's not the case and you're doing it maybe with Job Centre and you haven't got a working site you can use, then we've provided a list of items you might like to gather together to provide some mixed recycling, some PPE, some boxes, some sort of recycling boxes, so that you can have a practice in a classroom environment. And it will be assessed going forward by multiple choice assessment. So there'll be a single final assessment by multiple choice questioning, centrally set by WAMITAB and provided predominantly online, but in paper where there is a recognised need for it.
Katie?
Yes?
Just quickly, while you were going on that previous slide, I thought guided learning hours were going and we were having total qualification time instead.
We absolutely are, but Ofqual haven't guided us yet on how we should be doing that. We're waiting for, essentially, we're waiting for our regulators to tell us this is what we want and this is how we want it, and we haven't had that yet. So we're still on guided learning hours until such time as Ofqual give us some direct rules about total qualification time. When we move to total qualification time, we'll be looking at all of our qualifications. We'll have to, and we'll have a deadline set by our regulators of when we have to change them over.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at all of them, and at that stage we'll be looking to you guys really and asking different batches of centres for different qualifications depending on how many are delivered and through whom, and asking how long do you take to do this, how long do you take to do that, and we've got forms already, we're all ready to go. We've got the forms already set up, the credit and levelling forms that you will have seen, but marked up with TQT and GLH. And we're planning and ready to do it. We're just waiting for our regulators to tell us exactly how they want it to be. So that GLH, you're right, it may well change, but for now it's just 46 guided learning hours.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Will we get some guidance on TQT as well? Because
you will.
Right. Okay. Because I'm thinking it's going to be quite difficult to record actually.
Yeah, I'm going to cover it at the forum events that are happening in October. I'm hoping that we'll have had some guidance from our regulators by then, because it's really difficult for me to provide you with any guidance when I don't have anything definitive yet from the regulator. but essentially we will provide guidance, we'll have the forum events, we'll hold webinars, we'll work directly with individual centres where we've chosen them as sort of figures providers, but yes, we'll make sure we support as we go through the change.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you for that.
That's okay. Okay, so in terms of the structure of the qualification, it's a single mandatory unit, for those of you who aren't familiar with it. The unit is Introduction to Waste and Recycling, and it covers how to accept and collect waste and recyclables, removing and disposal of waste, how to work safely, and how to operate waste and recycling equipment and vehicles safely. The way that we've developed the learning materials, those learning outcomes sit within an overarching theme of sustainability. So the whole first section, we have covered sustainability, what it means, how it's interpreted by the EU Framework Directive, how it could be, so we've put some fun things about how it could be interpreted. And the reason that we've done that is that we need to get learner investment in the qualification before we expect them to learn and be able to complete the multiple choice test. So it's about creating interest, getting them invested and interested, and it's a theme. Sustainability is a theme that we'll be putting through a number of the new level ones that we've spoken about a bit earlier today. So the materials that we've developed and we'll be providing to centres who want to deliver this qualification are lesson plans and reasonable adjustment plans for the classroom. So our lesson plans are very basic. We're not prescribing times or anything like that, but what we are doing is giving you a structure that you can use if you wish to develop it using our materials, to deliver it using our materials, and some reasonable adjustment plans to ensure that you cater to the needs of different learners in the classroom. We've got presentation slides, and those slides cover every aspect of the assessment criteria. And those slides have got supporting tutor notes. So at the bottom of the slide within PowerPoint in the notes section, there is a range of notes that explain where we got the information from, where you can get more information, and sometimes we've actually just copy and pasted some information on there for you to sort of understand where we were coming from when the slide was written, so you're teaching to the right depth and scope. There's a tutor guidance document which has got information for the tutor about tips for delivery, resources available, and it also has a range of activities within it. There's the learner workbook. The learner workbook covers every assessment criteria. It says what the learner will need to know. It's got some space for the learner to make their own notes, and then at the end of each section, so at the end of each learning outcome section, you've got some sort of understanding checks in there with some different types of activities, some written, some very visual and with lots of imagery, and essentially that's for you to make sure that the learner's understanding as you're going along. The idea is that each learner has their own copy and it becomes theirs. It's something that they can own and take with them and move on through with them, but also it can be a revision guide for them, and you can set them work to do outside of the classroom using it as well. The learner activities sit within the tutor guidance document. There's around 15 of these, and they can be used on top of the learner workbook just as you go through the teaching programme, sort of photocopy them, use them, and we've integrated literacy and numeracy into some of those as well, just to make sure that we're hitting the needs of all learners. There's a toolkit list. I've already mentioned this. Essentially, this is so that you know everything that you should have with you when you start delivering, and it's particularly good for those people who are not delivering on a working site. So it will cover like a list of some things that you might like to have in a toolbox, like some PPE and some mixed recycling and stuff like that. And we've got a resource guide which says everywhere that we got our information, plus loads more places that you can get some good teaching resources. And then there's a final multiple choice assessment. So we have developed the assessment, WAMITAB have developed the assessment. We monitor those questions and we provide them by online testing. Now we recognise that online is not okay everywhere. And so for people who can demonstrate that there's a specific need for a paper-based test, we'll provide it in paper-based format.
Katie, two things come to mind on that previous one, sorry. What do you mean by reasonable adjustment plans? And also, when you talk about there's a final assessment, which is the test obviously, is that the only evidence you need? You don't need to see the workbook?
Yeah. So with regards to reasonable adjustment plans, it's just things that can be done in the classroom to make learning easier for each specific learner. And it's just a list of things, and it will just help you if you need to order extra equipment or anything like that. That's nothing to do with assessment. We do have reasonable adjustments in terms of assessments as well, and that is a specific procedure that we have and a form that you'd need to complete to access a reasonable adjustment in assessment. So it's slightly different.
Okay.
With the final MCQ, the multiple choice assessment is the full summative assessment, so we wouldn't require any other evidence. Now, there are assessments as you go through all the time in the learner workbook, in the activities. We've got some practice questions. Those are all formative testing, and we don't require any evidence of those. The evidence for us is that final MCQ assessment, and that's how we will make decisions about whether learners are ready to be certificated or not based on those results.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay. So Helen's just showing you a slide now, which is an example of the lesson plans. And then moving on, there's a tutor guidance and worksheet slide, which is just showing what those tutor guidance documents look like. They're much bigger than this, you know, sort of pages and pages long, and we can send those out to you by email when you're ready to start delivering to those people who are approved to deliver. The date is showing there. You can see, I don't know if you can see, it's quite small on my screen, but it's showing you a reading list. So it's got potential reading lists that you can provide to learners, or you can use yourself and extract important points out of. And there's an outline of all of the slides and what they're covering. This is an example now of the learner workbooks. So you can see we've got Learning Outcome 1, Handling Waste. We've written the assessment criteria down. We've got what you need to know, so some specifics, and then a source so that they can go and do some more research, and a place for them to put their own notes. And those were just examples. As I said, we can send out the full materials to those of you who are approved to deliver and ready to go. And you can drop me an email after this, or drop Helen an email after this. She can send the slides out for you. In terms of ownership, WAMITAB retains the copyright for materials, but we do give reproduction permission to our approved centres, with the caveat that reproduction is used for the delivery of WAMITAB qualifications. Now, it might be that you see some stuff in the level 1 that you think can help some of your level 2 learners. We haven't got a problem with that at all, but what we're saying is these are WAMITAB materials, let's use them for WAMITAB qualifications. We do encourage you to tailor the materials to suit your own needs. It might be that we have written things in a slightly different style than you're used to, or your learners have very slightly different needs. We wouldn't have a problem with you tailoring materials, but what we would say is that any annual and ad hoc updates to those materials will be done to the original versions. So if you've tailored yours, you'll have to tailor them again every time you make an update. So just to give you a bit of background on the development of this, the way that we've done this programme, the material's been developed at WAMITAB HQ. Helen and I have developed the materials based on the learning outcomes and assessment criteria and our knowledge of learning material development. But we recognised that it was important that we followed our own procedures, and actually we use the accredit process. We have an accredit process that recognises good learning and learning materials and courses that employers might have, and it seemed reasonable that we use that same process on our own materials. So we put it through the accredit panel. We used an expert panel, so a very large employer within the waste and resource management industry, a published doctorate in the waste and resource management industry, and actually Chris James, our CEO, who is the ex-chief examiner for biology, so he's very used to seeing this style of delivery, and so could look at it from an educational perspective. So those people came back to us with feedback, which we took into the materials and made changes. And then after that, we had the live learner pilot. So we ran a pilot We've had around 30 learners go through so far, and we've taken on the responses of those learners, taken those on board into the development as well. What we found is that the learners were saying that they loved the course, but there weren't enough activities, which is why there's now 15 on top of the learner workbooks, because we really went to town and gave them loads. So the Reg and certification fee is going up. So the new fee will be £75 per learner, but will cover registration, all of the training materials, and the test. And the test, if unsuccessful, learners are allowed to access up to 2 free resits. If at the stage they get and they've sat 3 tests and they haven't been successful in any of them, we will require them to wait a minimum of 6 months before re-registering for the qualification. And that's really because we need to protect the integrity of the question bank, because at that stage they will have seen 60, 70 odd questions from our question bank, and we need to make sure that we don't have overexposure of that bank to a single learner. And that £75 fee also covers certification. So in terms of getting started with the Level 1 award, existing centres, so if you've already got approved status for the Level 1 award in waste and recycling, there is no change to your approval status. You won't need to reapply at all. But there will be no ongoing requirement to retain qualified assessors and internal quality assurers for delivery of the qualification, because we will be assessing it. We'll be setting that assessment. We'll be marking and moderating those results and sending those results out and certificating them. So there isn't a need to have the assessors and IQAs in place. Of course, you will need to retain tutors who can deliver the programme, and you will also need invigilators who can, and those are 2 different people, so you can't use the tutor to do the invigilation. There will also be an additional clause in the service level agreement that just says that we will not expect inappropriate use of materials, so to use those materials for WAMITAB qualifications only. For centres who don't already have approval, new applications can be applied for using the usual scheme approval process. It is a slightly different situation in that you won't need to demonstrate that you have occupationally competent qualified assessors and IQAs. You will just need to provide us the details of tutors. The WAMITAB contacts for delivery are currently myself and Helen. I think because we've developed the course, we've sort of taken ownership of it. But that's not a long-term solution. So we're actually currently hiring, and we have found someone to take the position of qualifications assistant, and they will be starting with us reasonably soon. And so for now, the contact is Helen and myself, but it might be that changes again going forward, and we'll keep you abreast of any changes anyway. There is a learner registration spreadsheet. You'll be used to them from the spreadsheets that you usually fill in, and you can use that to book tests with us as well. Test booking, if you're booking a test for a paper-based test, you need to give us 5 days notice, and if that is an online test, it's just 3 days notice. And that's just recognising the fact that with paper we have to print them out and send them out to you securely. So it just recognises the difference in time requirements for that. In terms of receipt and storage of test scripts, so if you're doing the paper-based tests, we will send them out, and they should be held by probably the centre coordinator or someone at the centre who's not the tutor. And then the invigilator can access those to provide the test on the test day. They should then be securely bound and returned back to WAMITAB with the invigilation documents. Invigilation documentation is available, we provide it. It gives guidance on the requirements for delivery of multiple choice tests, and it gives the invigilator the requirements for the test scenario, and provides forms for the invigilator to complete, so that at WAMITAB we have sort of a snapshot of how the test was run and how that looked, just to make sure that it's in line with everything that we would expect. Results will be provided 5 working days after we've been able to receive and sign off complete invigilator documentation and scripts. And at that stage, if you've got learners who have been successful, those will automatically be certificated once payment is received. And if you've got learners who aren't successful, we will inform you, and you will need to tell us if they want to book WSITs or not, and you can do that using the learner registration spreadsheet. Okay, so for delivery requirements, we did cover a little bit in the AVR1 scheme approval section, but what we'll require is that tutors should be occupationally competent, or they should have received tutor training day training. So if you get to a stage where you've, and it's probably unlikely with the centres model, but if you've got to a stage where you want to empower someone perhaps within an employer or at the job centre to deliver the programme themselves, then they would have to have some form of training. That can be delivered by WAMITAB or by yourself. And it really just goes through the requirements of the full qualification. And there's a test at the end for those tutors who are not occupationally competent, which is certificated. It's primarily classroom-based delivery, and we've got some, in the tutor guidance note, there are some tips in there for motivating learners and communicating effectively, which can be used if you're training people who've not been tutoring perhaps before. Going for assessment, we've got some information for learners which sets out the rules that they have to follow in the assessment, which you may find useful for learners who perhaps haven't sat a formal academic qualification for some time. We've got some practice questions in the learner workbook at the end of each learning outcome section. You'll see that there are 5 practice questions, and you can perhaps deliver those all at once, or you can choose to maybe give them a full test scenario where they practice the test environment. In terms of post-test support, we will provide results and give you information about how to access resits, and there'll be a maximum of 2 of those available. We will set the multiple choice testing and provide it online or paper-based. It's 26 questions and 45 minutes, and we have regulations for the delivery of tests that will need to be followed. And we'll know if they've been followed because we will be able to see from the invigilator documentation whether or not the test was run in adequate conditions. And so that invigilator documentation covers things like a diagram of where everybody sat, how far apart seats were, a declaration from each learner to say that the answers there are their own, a check for identification of learners. It's the usual type of stuff that you see, the invigilation requirements. Marking and moderation will happen at WAMITAB HQ. If you're doing the online version, the test system does all of that for us and provides us with results. It won't come directly, the results won't come directly to you. The reason they don't come directly to you is that we need to verify the invigilation paperwork before we send results out. We do ongoing psychometric testing of our MCQ questions, which is just really to understand that. It's looking at how many learners achieve or fail every question and what distractor they chose if they didn't achieve. And that allows us to see whether the questions are performing well. Because, for instance, if we had a question that had 100 learners who'd sat it and only 99 of them had got it wrong and only 1 of them had got it right, then we'd have to be looking at whether or not it's the learners or the question, and at that stage we'd probably consider that the question isn't performing. We provide results to centres by email, and certification follows once we have received payment for the registration of the learners. So in terms of quality assurance, it's an invigilated closed book assessment and has all the rules associated with that. We also reserve the right to make unannounced EQA observations. So you need to tell us where the tests are happening when you book your tests. And it may be that we send someone in just to check that tests are happening the way we should. This isn't necessarily a regular occurrence, but it's something that we need to do just to make sure that we have standardisation across the board in delivery. We do provide best practice for invigilation guidelines. Those are similar guidelines to the ones that we've used in the parking sector and have been well received there. And ultimately, the point of it is to maintain the validity of the qualification and its recognition in the industry, so that we safeguard the effort of learners when they're with all good faith taking our qualifications. So the benefits, just to summarise, are we will have reduced cost in delivery because you will have reduced cost of personnel and development time for learning materials. Those learning materials are being provided to you. We provide them electronically and you can print them off or use them as necessary. There is an online assessment, so we've got standardisation of assessment across the board, set by WAMITAB, reviewed by WAMITAB. And there is opportunity there for work programmes, so work with people like Job Centre Plus on employability initiatives, with employers on perhaps induction style programmes for new entrants, or agencies for agency staff going into the sector, and the qualification is funded at £336 per learner. I think that's about it from me. Has anybody got any questions on what we've covered today?
Hi Katie, it's Ron Virtual.
Hi Ron.
Yeah, just a quick one. Do you take a disqualification as a training outcome rather than a competency-based outcome?
Yeah, it's got knowledge outcomes. So it's about them being able to know and understand the items covered in the learning outcomes. So it's very much classroom-based. It's taught and tested, Ron.
Okay, so the other issue was, I know that you mentioned that you've got a question bank of 80 questions in the pool as it stands today. How many test papers will there be? You know.
No, we haven't got 80 questions. We've got a ratio of 4 to 1. So for every assessment criteria, we've got a minimum of 4 questions. Okay. So the way that it works is, with online testing, it doesn't pull off specific test papers. Every time a learner logs in, they access, so the learner logs in giving the codes that we've given them, and then they are given a random selection of questions. So if they're sitting next, or 1.25 metres down from the next learner, say taking the same test at the same time, they could have completely different questions. They might not have a single question the same. When they do have, they might have the odd question that's the same. If they do, it might be that the distractors are in a different order. So the distractors are randomised as well. So it's so random that you don't get specific test papers. With paper-based, it's a bit different. So with paper-based, we actually pull off test papers. And so in a batch of 10, you might get 3 different types of test papers that will come around. So that's why we prefer online delivery. But paper-based is relevant in certain settings. So for instance, in the prison setting where they can't access the internet, paper-based works quite well. But in a normal scenario where you're in a classroom setting accessing the internet, there shouldn't be any problem with online.
What is the pass rate out of 100%?
The pass mark is 70%. And it looks as though that is very close to the pass rate based on the pilot as well. So I think we've probably set that about right. Someone's asking me, if a candidate fails a test, will they still be funded, or is the funding for that person lost? My understanding is that the funding is currently not outcome-based, although it might be that a percentage of it is. I think that definitely should be covered in the SFA guidance, but my understanding is that you'll still draw down certainly a percentage of it. To date, with parking and with this, we haven't had anyone fail more than 3 times, because remember, they've got 3 opportunities, and you've got opportunities in between those tests to reiterate that knowledge and go back over any areas of concern. But I'd have to check that with the Skills Funding Agency. I couldn't tell you, but I don't think you'd lose all of the funding if a learner failed all 3 tests.
Katie, if I can put our pennyworth in from our point of view, because we are funded, you draw down money for the teaching and the training as well as the outcome. So even if we have it with our health and safety in a construction environment, if they fail the test, we put it in as a partial unit, and you draw down funding for however long that learner is sat in a classroom environment. I don't know what percentage it works out to, but you will get some outcome payment for it if it's a completed unit, but you still don't lose all the money.
Ah, okay, that's helpful then. So that's what I thought. I thought that there would still be some percentage you could draw down.
Yeah, it's how you record it for the SFA. If you put it in as a partial, you get money. If you put it in completed, you get all the money.
Right, okay. That's great. Thanks for that, Judith. That's helpful. Have we got any more questions today?
Just a quick one from Virtual again, Katie.
Yeah.
The credit value that the previous person just asked you about, under the old system, even like the statutory qualification, the credit value was the equivalent of 1.61. Now you've mentioned that the credit value for this one is it's increased. It's gone to 1.75 credit, which is an increase of about 8% roughly. I'm just
sorry, Ron, I'm not sure what you mean. The credit value for this qualification is 7 credits.
Okay, divided by 4 being the amount of outcomes, is that right?
No, that's not how it works.
Okay,
when we've allocated hours and credit, actually this unit is not a WAMITAB Develop one, but when WAMITAB allocate hours and credit, it's done with technical working groups who make essentially estimates on the time allocations for different aspects of delivery of each unit. It's not done that if there's 4 assessment criteria, it must be 4 hours or anything like that. It's not as formulaic as that. Now, it is usual to see 1 credit equals 10 guided learning hours. If that's what you mean, then that is true. I think the difference with this one is about the amount of time the learner will have to spend sort of in study, in preparation. Any other questions?
No, apart from about the workbook, has that got date information in that might become out of date, and in which case does WAMITAB look at this annually to see?
Yes, we do look at it annually. We're going to look at it every September, and we'll also look at it on an ad hoc basis. So if we're informed that something very specific has changed, then we'll make sure that the materials are updated to reflect that change. It refers to things like injury statistics, there's some legislation references in there, and it will be those sort of things that we would expect to change, but we will update them. And that's why I say, if you are planning to tailor our materials, just be aware that if we update them, we'll update our version, not yours, and so you'll have to tailor again or slot a new slide in.
Right, okay.
But we'll keep a record of what changes so that we can give you a list of, we'll give you the new slides and we'll say, look, these are where the changes are, so that you can find them.
Okay, thank you.
Any more?
No, I think that's it for me, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I hope that we've been able to explain how things will be delivered moving forward with the level 1. We'd like to move to this model absolutely for new registrations happening from the 1st of January. We can use this model from now. If you're ready to start delivering it from now, that's perfect. But we recognise that you might have contracts already that you've already got commissioned or that you've already got in that we need to honour. And so from the 1st of January, absolutely you should be using this model. Up until then, it's discretionary. So I hope that you will consider using it. I hope that we hear from you asking for a look at the materials. I'm sure you'll enjoy going through them. And if you need anything else in the meantime, please just drop me or Helen a line.
Do we take it that that the PowerPoint presentation can be downloaded, or you can send us it?
Yeah, once you're approved to deliver the qualification, you can drop us an email to request that material and it will be sent out to you.
Okay, thanks, Katie.